And what I'm coming to realize is that if you grew up in a minefield, suppose you were raised literally in a minefield, where there's mines all over the place, you'd be pretty careful where you walk.
Welcome to Trojan Talks. I'm Byung Kim, interim president of USC, and this podcast is a space for open conversation with thought leaders both inside and beyond USC as we explore the ideas shaping USC's future. Today, I am absolutely delighted to welcome Jonathan Haidt, the renowned social psychologist and best-selling author of a number of important books that I've learned a lot from, including The Righteous Mind, The Coddling of the American Mind, and The Anxious Generation. Jonathan, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure, Byung.
In The Anxious Generation, you talk about the way that social media and cell phones have rewired adolescent brains. And there's a chapter in the book about what schools can do about this, in particular K through 12 schools.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you, what can universities do about this problem? And is it too late by the time they reach us?
Yeah. Well, first, let me just say, I'm here with you in part because I'm here for Parents Weekend, and I really feel like I'm now part of the Trojan family. This is an amazing university that really has just such intense alumni and creates such a community. So I'm really grateful to now be part of it, grateful that my son is here. In terms of what universities can do, yeah, I'm thinking about that a lot. Each of my 4 books actually has lessons that I think can be applied. So my first book, The Happiness Hypothesis, the conclusion of the book is that happiness doesn't come from getting what you want. It doesn't come from within entirely. It comes from between. It comes from getting the right kind of embeddedness between yourself and others, yourself in some sort of productive work, and yourself in something larger than yourself. And when students are coming to campus, it used to be, they had more experience. They were more socially skilled. They hadn't been as isolated. And especially we add in COVID affecting much of their development. So anything that universities can do to ease that trend, to get them embedded in the right way. And it doesn't mean go out and do, some volunteer work somewhere else. It's like, what are the ongoing relationships? So embeddedness. My second book, The Righteous Mind, was about moral psychology and the culture war. And this was written in 2011, 2012. And it's so much worse now. And the hostilities are ripping apart our country, our universities. So I think universities can do a lot to prepare students to be in a politically diverse environment and to profit from it, to thrive in it, rather than getting upset and switching out of learning mode and into activist mode. My third book, The Coddling of the American Mind, was exactly about these changes that happened on campus around 2014 as Gen Z arrived. And I hope we'll come back, and this is a big topic, but anti-fragility, just helping students have to do young people have to do hard things in order to grow up, in order to get strong. And so there's so much we can do to not continue the overprotection, but instead frame it as a series of challenges where we're there to help them. But the whole point of this is for you to accept these challenges and do hard things and grow. And then my most recent book, The Anxious Generation, what I'm coming to see, I teach a course at NYU called Flourishing. And what I'm coming to see is if you don't help them get control of their digital habits, there's not much else you can do. You have to start there. So, that was maybe too much for my first answer for you, but those are some of my thoughts.
But on the last point, John, isn't it too late by the time they get to universities to try to change their social media or cell phone habits?
Definitely not. No, definitely not. So a couple of things. First, so in the book, it's true I do talk about a sensitive period for culture development from around age 8 or 9 through about 15, 16. And there's some evidence that the things you do then that's a period of very, very rapid brain development. Neurons are myelinating, finding each other, you're sort of locking down at the adult pattern. So it is true that the most important time is really, middle school and early high school. That's the real heart of the sensitive period. But the prefrontal cortex doesn't finish myelinating, sort of locking down, until around age 25. So just neurologically speaking, yeah, it would have been better earlier, but there's still a lot we can do. And I can add on to that, now that I've been teaching this course, I've been teaching a version of it for about 12 years to MBA students, but I developed an undergrad version 2 or 3 years ago. I've taught it 4 times now. And what I can tell you is every single one of the students, when I ask them, what are your digital habits, what are the hours, what are you on, And then do you endorse your habits? Or do you want to change them a little, or do you want to change them a lot? Not a single student endorses their habits, not one. Half of them say they want to change, they recognize things would be better, they want to make it a little better. And then half say, I want to make major changes. So Gen Z, they know what the problems are. They're not in denial, they don't love this stuff, they just feel trapped. And what we do in the class is I help them get control. Simple things like start by just turning off notifications for almost everything, especially Gmail. Don't get a notification every time you get an email. Take your social media platforms, take at least one of them off of your phone. Just check it on your computer. There's all kinds of steps you can take. And as they free up, as they start spending, not 5 or 7 hours a day, but as it gets down to just 2 or 3, they discover, oh, wow, I have more time, I can do my homework, I'm less stressed. So I've seen amazing transformations in these 19, 20-year-old students.
So here's a pedagogical question. Do you allow laptops in your class?
No, it is very important. Okay, I'm going to look right at the camera. If any professors out there watching this, I strongly, strongly recommend that you do a no devices policy at all. And here's why. I think with my computer, I'm always taking notes. And for years, I would say to my students, okay, everyone's distracted, but you can use your computer to take notes if you solemnly swear that you will only use it for, and I did that for many years. And then the TA would tell me, like, they're all, they're texting, they're on social media, they're day trading, these are the MBA students. And so now we have an absolute no devices policy, and a lot of professors are doing it, and the students prefer it. Obviously, there's some classes where you can't, but the default, and something that I was urging President Mills to consider, and I think every president should consider, is obviously you can't tell the faculty, like you can't, but this is all a game of setting norms. That's really the key to breaking out of this. And who sets norms? The leadership has responsibility for the culture. So if you, or any university president were to say, here's the problem, we're all wrestling with this. We've had a faculty, we convened it, we've decided to recommend that all classes be screen-free by default. But if you have a need for it, of course.
I was speaking to a business school professor here who actually goes one step further.
Oh.
Not only does he ban laptops and cell phones, but he actually doesn't even want the students to be taking notes, because he wants them in this discussion class that he has to be able to speak directly to each other, make eye contact, and really engage and listen fully. So
I like that.
It's just interesting.
Right, depending on what the class is, I can totally see it. Because the issue here is presence. For literally thousands of years, the advice of the ancients was sort of be here now, like be present. Don't, the mind is always jumping around. Buddhism, teaches ways to control your thinking. So being fully present in what we're doing has always been an issue. And as soon as students got phones in their pockets, boom, like it's hard for them to be present anywhere. It's for us too. So I think that's a really cool idea, to try a class where you have to be totally present socially and eye contact. I may try that.
Yeah. Going back to one of the things you talked about, John, with respect to embeddedness from your first book, I am particularly proud that at USC, our mission statement actually talks a lot about not just intellectual and academic development, but also development in wisdom and moral discernment. And it talks a lot about community. We call it here at USC our Trojan family. And I wanted to just ask you for your thoughts about whether there are opportunities for universities to provide even more of that kind of social connectivity and embeddedness, as you put it.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you have both the moral discernment and the family, because they're actually really, really complementary. When you walk around our oldest universities, you see written in stone all kinds of moral advice. Over the gates at Harvard, I can't remember the quote, but at UVA, Jefferson's words were all over. Everybody understood until the 1970s, everybody understood that part of the task of raising a child and educating them, it's not just teaching them facts and skills. You have to teach them character and what is important. I would even go so far as to say, what is sacred in this institution? Institutions need something sacred in the middle that they circle around. And for us, I believe it's the pursuit of truth. It's a noble enterprise. It's a hard enterprise. We're the specialists. We're the high priests. Like, we need to treat truth as this sacred value. And in the 70s, there was a movement to get rid of, preaching morality and get morality out of the schools, and how dare you teach my kids your morality? We have a lot of diversity now. And that would have been okay if kids were embedded in thick, rich moral cultures outside of school. But so much of the last 50 years has been the dissolution of social capital, trust, institutions, as more and more of life moves originally into the living room, watching TV with maybe a couple of people, and now alone consuming content. So anything that embeds us or connects us and puts us in a coherent moral world is just disappearing. And this, I believe, is why we get, I'll tell you, the saddest graph in The Anxious Generation. It goes like this. There's a question, survey question asked to American high school students. The statement is, life often feels meaningless. Do you agree or disagree on a 5-point scale? And from the 90s through 2010, 2011, it was about 9% roughly say, yes, I agree, my life often feels meaningless. And all of a sudden, 2013, it goes shooting up, it doubles over the next 8 or so years. Our students feel like they're just lost in space. And so I think universities need to be a lot more active in rooting them in a sense of family, because that's our deepest ability to bond, and in the sense of being part of a moral community that has sacred values, and that we are organized around that, and that if you embrace them, you'll come out not just more knowledgeable, but you'll come out with more, I would use the term moral discernment. It sounds a little old-fashioned, but I think we need to talk about morality in that way more often.
I love that, and I love the subtle distinction that I think you're implicitly drawing. When we talk about moral discernment, when we talk about moral solidarity and development, we're talking more in a Durkheimian sense, not in the sense of you shall not do X, Y, or Z.
Right.
It's not about being prescriptive in terms of what to believe. It's about understanding the connectivity that we all have as a community.
My concern is that morality is best understood as a moral matrix. Morality is a consensual hallucination. We come together, we imagine this world that has all kinds of rules and norms and history and stories, and then we can live within it. And we can't live in a vacuum. That's what Durkheim called anomie, or normlessness, and that leads to suicide and meaninglessness, which is what is affecting young people all over the world. Yeah. Variations across countries, but it's not just the U.S. It's most of the world.
It would be amazing if Durkheim had his moment coming back today, right?
Yeah. Oh my God, we need him badly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just want to make the point that because we're often we're so afraid to impose morality on anyone.
Right.
So like you find your purpose, and I would just say the more you, we're members of communities at multiple levels. So like you're human, and there are obligations to other humans. Okay, you're an American if you're a citizen, and there we're divided. So there is an issue there of, well, we can't endorse left or right, but that's the main area where we're divided. And then you're a member of the USC family, and there now you really can do things that bring us together. Or you're in ROTC or on a sports team or whatever. So
or
I
in
think
a fraternity.
Or a fraternity. That's right. Right. Fraternities. I'm the sort of person who used to always be sort of against. When I was much younger, and when I was in college, I thought, it just leads to drunkenness and stupidity. But once I became, I'm sorry, please don't judge me just yet. Wait, once I started studying moral psychology and reading Durkheim and understanding the need, I came to see, when I was a professor at UVA, I came to see fraternities really do a job of binding kids together, causing them to feel they've found their people. They produce, I think, a lot of social good. Obviously, there's toxicity, there have been problems, there have been deaths, so I'm not saying, great, go. But I'm just saying, I think I have a more positive view of fraternities than most faculty members do, because I understand this desperate need for our young people to be part of a group.
I agree. And when you talk to a lot of alums, a lot of them didn't join fraternities and weren't members, but a lot of them did. And that's what they talk about in terms of when they think about their experience at USC and why it was so rich.
And tell me how big a role fraternities play in who becomes a donor to USC. Do you think the people who are in frats are more likely to be donors to the university?
There definitely seems to be a correlation, and I don't think it has to do with the fraternities per se, but just about the richness of the experience that they had at USC.
They feel more rooted. I know, because I asked you that question because I know that was the case at UVA. So I imagine it's a universal thing.
Yeah. Let me ask you a little bit about encouraging a culture where students feel not only comfortable but empowered to have difficult conversations around controversial topics. Some of what you've described in your books in terms of fragmentation, it seems to me that your argument is that that also creates a kind of fragility. And while students need support, given all the reasons that you've discussed, it's also really important to create a culture where they feel like they can have arguments and disagree and then go out and have fun with the person and not take it personally. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about going beyond rules and free speech prescriptions. How do we create as universities more of a better culture, both for faculty and for students, to encourage that kind of civil disagreement?
Yeah. No, thanks for that question, because this has been one of my top priorities since about 2015. So I first began to notice as a social psychologist that everyone in my field is on the left. There are no conservatives. There's only one I could find. And I created an organization called Heterodox Academy to foster more viewpoint diversity among the faculty. And it was just a faculty project. I wasn't thinking about the students. But then, as things got a lot more polarized on campus, there were a lot of protests and conflicts beginning in 2015, and the mood on campus became much more tense. And then Donald Trump was elected, and that really polarized things on campus. So I co-founded an organization called the Constructive Dialogue Institute with Caroline Mell, who was working for me at the time. She's run it brilliantly since then. And we're now in, I think, more than 100 universities. Much more than 100. Do you know? I should have asked. Is USC? Are you? Do you know the Constructive Dialogue Institute? Have you been talking with them?
Yes, we have been talking to them, and we have a Heterodox Academy chapter, I believe, that's very active. And
no, that's right. This is such a USC is so well positioned for this. I know the general sense, but so to be more specific, what we do at CDI is we have a program called Perspectives that goes through why are people different on their values? Where do they come from? Where do your values come in? Students learn some moral and social psychology, and then they put it in practice, having conversations, and they develop skills of asking questions. So we're giving them skills, and it works. We have evidence it makes them less polarized, more open. But I want to bring in. So I urge anyone watching this, go to Constructive Dialogue.
It's wonderful.
There
are a lot of great resources there.
But what I'm realizing now is that the problem is even bigger than I thought. Beginning or in the mid-2010s, I started hearing professors. Remember David Brooks when he was teaching at Yale? He still is, I think. He was saying he can't get his students to debate each other. He can't get them to disagree with each other. And a lot, I've heard that a lot, and I find that in my classes too. It's just harder to get any kind of disagreement going. And what I'm coming to realize is that if you grew up in a minefield, suppose you were raised literally in a minefield, where there's mines all over the place, you'd be pretty careful where you walk. And then you come to college, and you would be really careful where you step. Well, once everyone got on social media around 2012, they all had it, an iPhone with social media in their pocket. And it became super viral a couple years after that. By 2015, it's super viral. It's a minefield. And they know, as one student said, my motto is silence is safer. They know if you just don't say anything, you won't get in trouble. And so we have to understand, our students are coming to us having grown up in social media in a minefield. And now we say, oh, just, speak your mind, say what you think. Oh, you criticize affirmative action or immigration. Oh, yeah, just say so. And they're afraid to. And so it's very hard. It's very hard to do this. But a lot of this points back, in everything we do, we have to be looking at the digital world. We have to be looking at what the digital world has done to them, and we have to help them overcome it. And I don't think we pay enough attention to that. Like, we sort of think what they do on social media is their business, and now here we're in class. Like, no. If you grow up on social media, you live in social media. So we have to try to help them get off of it as much as possible, care less about it. And then we have to cultivate the mindset of, there are all these different games you could be playing at any one time. You could be playing the competition game. We're in a discussion. I want to beat you. My goal is to win the argument. Yeah. Or you could be playing the, speaking to the preaching to the choir game. Like, I want them to like me, so I'm going to beat up on you in order to get points with them. Or you could be playing the learning game, which is whoever learns the most when they graduate wins. Whoever grew the most and learned the most on graduation day here at USC, you did it right. And the more you can speak explicitly about that as they come in, the more you can speak about the different games that you'll be called into. And I want to urge you to consider the most important game you could play is the learning and growth game. And if you come across someone who has ideas that you think are terrible, a number of ways you could react. One would be curiosity.
That's great. I want to go back to a couple of things that you said, John. So one of the things that I took from your answer is that it's easy just to say, oh, you should express yourself more, even if you're have this kind of viewpoint or that kind of viewpoint. And I think what you're saying is a lot easier said than done, because what we're dealing with is not just kind of a calculation and a number of incentives that a student is weighing through, but really kind of a set of habits that have been developed and reinforced through social media. So it's going to be a harder nut to crack.
That's right. Habit is the key word. That's great. The ancients, East and West, thought about moral development as habits. Was it Aristotle said, "We are what we repeatedly do." And you've got similar things from Mencius, and like the ancients knew this. They compared, people learn to be, good people, as a musician learns to play his instrument. So it's habits, and when I moved to NYU Stern and I was teaching the ethics course, I thought a lot about this. Can we change the ethics of our students in 2 years of an MBA program? And my conclusion was, in a single course, no, you really can't. You can teach them some things they need to know, but you can't change their habits. But if you have them for 4 years and you can have a coherent moral vision that you lay out before they arrive and at convocation when they welcome them, and in many of their classes. So if you can create a culture in 4 years, and a culture could be, we're in a brutal battle between left and right, we've got to crush the right. Like that's the culture on some university campuses. But if you can have a culture more of, our country is in huge trouble and we are in real danger of collapse over the next 5 or 10 years. We have a duty, we have an obligation to study this, to become citizens. So you can do that on campus. And then if you think about it as 4 years and you have a consistent set of constructs and a moral mission that brings us together, then I think you can have a lasting impact.
Beautiful. I want to talk to you about AI.
Oh boy,
Yeah, I know it's hard to go 12 hours without someone talking about AI.
Yeah.
Obviously, AI is a challenge with respect to a lot of the moral developmental issues that you've written about and thought about. And it also seems to me to create very significant challenges with respect to cognitive development if people are going to be using it more and more in lieu of writing. What are your thoughts, Jonathan?
So, at first, look, you and I first met, it was just like, 3 or 4 months ago. We had a conversation about AI, and what are we going to do, because we're all thinking how do we teach knowing that the students can just use AI to do all their homework, to write their papers? So there's the threat to learning and what we do in class. And of course, there's the threat to employment. It's going to be taking away so many entry-level jobs. So just since you and I met, now the assault of the chatbots. It's incredible what's happening and how fast it's happening. But to get to the heart of your question, the way that I'm thinking about this now is that technology helps us do things more easily. Tools have always done that, from the first Spear through ChatGPT. If you're an adult, you want to use tools because you have to get jobs done. And so, of course, I use AI, we all use it. But kids need to do hard things. And so, if you think about, if you have imagine that you have a 6 or 7 year old. Okay. How many servants do you want to give to that child? Do you want them to have a maid to clean the room, a cook to do all the cooking, a chauffeur to take her to school? How many servants do you think a 7-year-old should have? What's your answer?
0.
Good, that's the right answer. So, but then we give them access to AI, and now we can do almost everything for them, and soon there'll be robots as well, AI in robots. So once you understand that kids have to do hard things over and over again, they have to fail, we realize, we probably should be keeping AI away from children. I think we should get it entirely out of elementary school. High school is more, I don't know, I can see uses in high school or reasons to train them, but elementary school and middle school, there's no evidence this is helping, and there's a lot of evidence of harm. So I think we need to get all, and I'm talking about Chromebooks, iPad, all the technology, get it out of elementary school. the people who made this stuff, they send their kids to the Waldorf school because there's no technology there. They know how harmful this stuff is. So if we give our kids a tool that actually does their thinking for them, they're not going to learn to think. Kids aren't reading anymore. The phone is too interesting, and AI is going to mean there's no need to read a book. If I assign a book to my students, and I do it myself sometimes, I have to, I'll ask ChatGPT, give me a summary of the book. So if we lose reading and thinking, it's over for humanity.
Yeah. That sounds right to me. And it gets more complicated though when you get to college, because then you're trying to teach skills that they're going to need in the workplace, and workplace is completely transforming thanks to AI, so they need those skills. But they're also developing cognitively. So how are we going to thread that needle?
So given what we now know about how often they're using AI outside of class, outside of school, we don't have to worry that suppose we were to say in all our classes you can't use AI at all. They're still using it all over the place. They're still going to learn how to use it.
Exactly.
And it's going to be so different in a few years from how it is today. So I think we need to, in K-12, we really need to teach them to read, think, write, all that. I think that continues into college. And so, what many people, I'm doing the same thing, is, rather than having like a weekly integration paper that they do the readings, they summarize the readings, draw some links. Now that they can do all that with AI, I'm having them do a little bit more writing in class, which is more difficult to grade, more time consuming. But at least I think it sort of anchors them and tells them, okay, the professor knows how I write, so now I can't just send in ChatGPT because they're, so we've got to do what we can to encourage them to read, think, and write. And I don't think we need to worry about training them to use AI. They're going to learn that.
So the Blue Books are coming back.
They are, yeah, I'm using them.
John, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure, and fight on.
All right. Thank you, Byung, for welcoming me into the USC family, and fight on.